Okay, I am getting all set to enter the Abraham Lincoln Museum and Library in Springfield, Illinois. I decided to make the short drive. It's about an hour and a half from St. Louis up to visit. And you might think, well, Dan, what does this have to really do with theme parks? Now, obviously, the biggest connection is Lincoln, of course, plays a big part in the history of Disneyland. You still have great moments with Mr. Lincoln, 1964 World's Fair, big part of the Hall of Presidents, and just in general, there's a lot of connections there. But also, I heard about this library years ago on an episode of the Season Pass podcast. They talked about an attraction there called Ghosts in the Library, which includes like a holographic effect, which I'm really excited to see. There also appears to be a film called Lincoln's Eyes, which from what I've seen appears to be multiple screens, almost feels like something you'd see at Epcot or Circle Vision, a World's Fair kind of thing. And I've just heard a lot of really good things about this museum. And so my thought is this is an easy, fun little trip. I can do a podcast about it. And I'm about ready. I am here and about ready to go on inside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the time in there, see everything there is to see. Then I will give you a quick report of what I've seen. And then, of course, I will come back later and give kind of more of a summary with some background about the museum and whether it's worth seeing. There's also a special exhibit about the music of Illinois that looks really cool. There's a podcast about it. I've heard a few interviews with Tim McGrath from Rise Against and Jimmy Chamberlain from Smashing Pumpkins and a lot of others. So I'm excited to check that out too, and I would tell you about that. It's going to be fun. This is a bit different. I haven't done a trip report in a while, so I'm really excited to bring this to you. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Experience history like never before. Step inside key moments in Lincoln's life from triumph to tragedy. Experience immersive displays and shows that drive home the human cost of slavery and war. Connect with Lincoln and his family through artifacts that can't be found anywhere else in the world. You'll feel like you're walking in Lincoln's shoes. That is the description of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, which is the focus of this episode 157 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I'm your host, Dan Heaton. Welcome back here in 2022 to the show. I am really excited about lots of episodes that are on the way here on the Tomorrow Society podcast, including this one. Back in late November, I was able to visit the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield, Illinois. And I had never been there before. I had heard a lot about it and had a great time. You heard in the intro me describing kind of my thoughts before I went inside. I'm going to go back to a longer clip that I recorded after my visit very shortly. First, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the museum. I'm going to talk more about it later. It opened in 2005. It was designed, created, and produced by BRC Imagination Arts under the direction of the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, and it's generally called an experience museum, which is, especially in 2005, was very new. The idea is you're not just going and reading about things, you are actually through your own experience, through these historical artifacts and special shows and just some new technologies, which I'm going to talk about more in a little bit. So I've been wanting to go there for a long time and just hadn't made the trip, which is silly because I live in St. Louis. It's only about an hour and a half drive. So I'm glad that I finally made the trip, and I'm here to tell you all about it. After the clip I recorded back during my visit, I'm going to come back and give you more background about the history of the museum, some of the exhibits, and some other highlights. It's going to be super fun to dig into this. Before my trip report, I wanted to mention something new, which is you can now rate the Tomorrow Society podcast on Spotify. I know that some of you use Spotify to listen to the show, which is awesome. If you do, I would love if you could leave a 5-star rating for the show. It helps people to find the show, and if they do, it just reiterates that you're enjoying the podcast. So I will give you that task for this week. It makes a huge difference. All right, it is time. Let's take a trip to Springfield, Illinois to check out the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. So I just want to get my thoughts up front about the Abraham Lincoln Museum here in Springfield, Illinois. It's really cool. I'm very happy that I went because, you kind of think of it like, is it worth making a drive to see a museum, even about someone as interesting and as involved in so many crucial historical events as Abraham Lincoln? You're kind of like, is this worth it? And it totally is. So I'm going to talk briefly about everything I did kind of in order of going through it. I was there for probably about 2.5 hours, maybe a little more than that. And this was pretty much straight going through things. I didn't stop to eat or anything at the time, but you are able to, you buy your ticket, which is $15 for adults, and you're able to get a wristband so you can leave and walk around the downtown area, which has a lot of different Lincoln sites. I saw a few statues and other elements, including his childhood home is nearby. But the main draw for me was this museum. So I came in, and I want to say up front too, the people working there were super nice. They were like, oh, you haven't been here before. Gave me a lot of details, many which I knew, but still very cool to have somebody who's really like multiple people just standing there waiting to talk with you, very friendly, really knowledgeable. They, I had a situation where they explained where each area was, what it was, what was involved, which I imagine, especially for people that, unlike me, who hadn't kind of read up on some of the attractions and what I wanted to do, would be really helpful. So first I went into Ghost in the Library, which was the thing I wanted to see the most, which is a show. It's about 9 minutes. It's like a theatrical show, but this to me felt like you could tell that this was done by a company that understood, by a theme park design company. There's elements of theme park shows in this in multiple ways. First, there is a live actor in there who comes out and is basically playing the role of someone who works at the library. And the idea is to tell you why researching old letters and old artifacts and other items is important. But the trick here is, and I won't give away all of it, but the trick is there's visual effects, which this is something I'm going to look into and give more details on beforehand. I'm going to see if I can find that old interview, I think might have been with Bob Rogers from BRC, but talking about what was done for this. But I think they're using a Pepper's Ghost effect because you're sitting in seats that are on benches, and then there's a big open area you can't really see down below. And then you're kind of looking, and then there's also a glass, which I think allows them to project things and do some effects. And it reminds me a little bit, it's like I'm watching The Family from Carousel of Progress or something, only because, there's a bunch of sets of a library and all these different items he interacts with, and then he's walking through. But so you're close. It's like an intimate experience. It's not a big theater. You're able to sit very close on these benches, but you're also still kind of set apart. And I won't give it away, but there's an effect at the end. One, there's a big surprise, kind of about what happens. And then there's an effect at the end that I don't totally understand how it was done. And I don't know if I want to know, because I even went in a second time and watched it again because I was like, wait, what happened? And I think I get it a little more. But it's one of those effects where, again, it's like it's like something you'd expect to see in a show at a theme park, not just at your typical museum. And so everything's top notch. It has, the effects look really cool. You have sound, and, the actor did a great job because you think about it. The actor is interacting with things he doesn't really see in a way, I believe, because we are seeing it projected like a Pepper's Ghost effect, but he has to know where everything is and has to time it right to go with the show. There's a lot of skill involved with that. So it's worth it. Like I said, it's only about not even a 10-minute show. It plays about every 15 minutes, so there are a few breaks, but it plays often, and wow, such a cool show. That is not the only cool thing. The other thing is the film presentation, which I know I've mentioned both these quickly in the intro, Lincoln's Eyes, which I kind of thought, oh, this will be cool. It'd be a film and they have a few different screens. So it's good. No, this is much better than I expected, where they have essentially like a holographic effect where you have someone who's standing in there. There's a screen with putting together film clips, and then a guy who's kind of your narrator, and he's an artist that had actually created a painting that's outside of the theater, but he's giving you all this additional information. It's not on the level of like Dumbledore or something, or even the Christopher Walken, I believe, from Disaster. It's a little back from that, but it's still, you could easily sell yourself the idea that he's in the theater because it looks like he's talking directly to you. So that's one really cool thing. Another thing too is that there's a main screen and then there are two screens on each side, but the two screens on the side often give way to then physical sets. You think of almost like the American Adventure. It's not on that level again, but there's a shot of the White House, or there's cannons, and there's in-theater effects. So you have a case where there's a Civil War battle and the cannons are firing. You can see the physical cannons are there, and then your seats are shaking, or you've got lights coming in from the theater and other elements. So there's a few different sound, visual, and sensory effects going on in the theater. It's about, I think, 17 minutes. And also, too, does some interesting things with pictures of Lincoln and how his eyes look and how his facial expression to show how he was feeling the stress of everything. Some speeches from Lincoln. There's a funny moment where the holographic actor, or I wouldn't even call him an actor, the historian, pulls the picture in half and almost makes it into two different sides. Really cool. Again, top-notch, something you'd expect to see. I hate to just say theme park, because in a way, there are plenty of other cases with museums, science centers, zoos that are doing things on this level. But I would just say the effects and the quality is top-notch. And so one other thing I want to mention, too, is that I think this film does a good job of not presenting Lincoln just as this saintly figure. They show that, similar to a lot of politicians today, is that he was receiving flack both from the people that were for slavery or that wanted it to continue, and from people on the other side, the abolitionists, who thought he wasn't going far enough. And there's a really cool segment where you have someone talking about the Emancipation Proclamation and how it doesn't really do anything. And granted, I know it was more symbolic, and I don't want to get too far into that road, but I just, that being presented shows that idea and that message that Lincoln was a person and that he had difficult decisions permeates throughout the entire museum, because it's not as simple as just saying, they're showing great things he did, but they're also showing challenges and things that he didn't do as well, or that compromises he had to make and everything, which is, I think, really important to any great museum, especially in the 21st century. You can't just go back and say, Lincoln is someone we should revere. No, there's things he did that were great and super important that made the nation what it is, but it's definitely not as simple as that. And there were critics at the time for, against him. Some made good points, some did not. But it's really interesting to learn that within this film, which is, again, a must-see. I did those two right off the bat, and I was like, oh, I feel like I could go home right now. But then, of course, I hadn't even seen the exhibit yet, and there's a lot to see there, too. Next thing I did is I went into the special exhibit called The State of Sound. It's funny because just this past week, I had gone to an exhibit here in St. Louis at our Missouri History Museum about St. Louis sound and all the different various genres of music in St. Louis and the history of that. And St. Louis was, ragtime and R&B and soul and rock and blues and so much else. Well, this one is very similar, but it's for the state of Illinois. And it's a special exhibit. It's running till basically the end of January. So it won't be that much longer. If this is something you wanted to see, you would have to get there fairly soon. I found out about it partially when I was thinking about going, but also there's a podcast where you have the curator of this exhibit interviewing various artists from Illinois. And I know I mentioned that again in the intro, some of the people he talked with. That got me interested in it. And I think it's really well done. I will say this is a fairly small space. So even compared to the exhibit in St. Louis, or you think about like the Disney Archives exhibit I talked about in Memphis, or a lot of traveling exhibits you see, you might be expecting it to be larger. The space they have for their special exhibits is not huge. So given that fact, though, this uses the space well because it has a lot of cool pieces. You have guitars from various artists, outfits, lots of neat memorabilia like you would expect in this type of exhibit. But what they're really trying to do is tell you about the music. And they did it slightly different than the St. Louis sound. That one had you scan something on your cell phone, and then you bring your own headphones, and then basically could connect to that, and you would listen to various audio clips that were connected to what you were seeing. This one they give you sanitized headphones to use, like kind of big musician headphones essentially, but it's not just music clips. What you're doing is you take this, they have a cord, you take the cord, stick it into these various areas, and they actually had like a low, medium, and high in terms of loudness, I think, where essentially, I was always picking the lowest because when I put it in medium, I felt like my ears were getting blown out. So I don't know. They're playing music, but it's going genre by genre through all different types of genres, starting with like Mahalia Jackson, and then looking at early jazz and blues legends, also folk singers, and then you're kind of getting into more modern things, whether it's like alternative country, alternative, or punk and alternative, rock, disco, industrial, all these different things. And I listen to a lot of them. Though one thing I will say is you come up, you're going to catch it. If someone had been watching it and stopped, it's going to be wherever it is. So some of them I watched from front to back, others I started in the middle, and to go through all of them would take a long time. So I kind of picked and choose the one that I thought seemed most interesting, or that I was most interested in, and they do a good job. These are essentially their video clips where you have a narrator describing different stages of the genre, using examples of artists, and to kind of sell what they're doing. Like, for example, the country, I hate to say even country, but country-like section focused a lot on Alison Krauss. They also focused on Bloodshot Records. They talked about Wilco. So bands like that, or, punk talked a lot about Naked Raygun and Rise Against. So they kind of focused on a few. Hip-hop focused on Common, also mentioned Kanye. So a lot of different artists. So this is just something that if you're interested in music, you might be going there to see the Lincoln exhibits, but then this is something, if you do get there before the end of January, that you're able to also see this. It's included. It is not an additional charge, which I think is really cool, because you do see some museums where it's like, oh, it's $20 to get in. Oh, it's another $15 for this exhibit. No, everything's included. So you're able to see this for no additional fee. Go in there for a little while, check out a bit of music, see some cool stuff, and then head back out. Well, the next thing I did after that is I went to the actual big Lincoln exhibits, and they're really cool. They're like, you have essentially two big areas, Journey 1 and Journey 2. And the first journey is about his younger life. You start out going into a cabin, which is like his childhood home in Kentucky, and then you see Lincoln as a kid. You see him, the famous stories with him reading in the cabin, and then it kind of goes from there and moves up to when he essentially, finds love, becomes a lawyer, eventually gets married, all the things before he became president of the United States, or even was interested in becoming a candidate. All those things happen in the first half. And I will say about all these exhibits, they do a really good job of giving a lot of information, but not making it seem stuffy, not making it seem like a boring museum. So they have a lot of character figures in each scene. You have little moments like you're in the cabin, you hear someone snoring. So they use sound. You go in a room where the kids are playing. You can hear the kids laughing. They also have cases where, there's a kitchen scene where you go in. This is actually in Journey 2. But you go in and you hear like kitchen workers talking about whether Lincoln would free the slaves. And you're near the oven and it's warm right there. And it's little things like that. Video, audio, every way they can. I feel like they've done a really good job to make this like a more lively experience where you're learning about his life, but his life feels alive. It doesn't feel old or boring or kind of dead. So you go through the first journey, and I think that was really well done. And even better was the second area, where you're basically going through what looks like the White House, coming in, and they start out immediately. He gets elected, and this whole area does a really good job job, like I mentioned earlier, of showing the turmoil, showing the difficulty. There's this hallway, even with this hallway where everything's kind of bent, where even the doors are slanted, where it's basically, and they have all these like caricatures of Lincoln, some very offensive, but basically that people were presenting him in this terrible way because they're saying, oh, you know, he's actually various things in disguise. He's a devil, or he's, you know, he's not American. He's, you know, all this just awful. But, and then also on the other side, people presenting him as being weak. Or, you know, so it's both ends. Again, like he didn't do enough. He's doing too much. It's brutal. And I think about the attacks laid on politicians now, nothing compared to what this was. You know, a lot of newspaper, editorial cartoons, everything, much rougher. And there's other areas where you have these big signs that said, it's not enough, it's too much. All the, you know, just really well done across the board. Big rooms, like really large area. It doesn't seem that way. And you walk in, you keep going in these big rooms. There's another area where there's a map that just has numbers of casualties and then also shows where the Union armies are and where the Confederate armies are. As time goes up, the numbers keep increasing. Then you can see, oh, there's Sherman's March. There's a move to Vicksburg. There's Appomattox. Also very neat. There's more than I could really comprehend. And then, of course, you get up to some areas about the assassination and then having him being laid to rest. And what I appreciate, too, is it nothing feels too obvious. Nothing feels basic. But it's all very understandable. Like, you don't even really need to read the entries nearby to get the gist of it. That just adds to it. I want to mention one other room. There's a room where you walk down a hallway, and there's all these visuals of characters. You know, it's videos, but it kind of looks like they're in there with you, similar to like that holographic effect. And they're on both sides of you, basically shouting all these different things. Again, similar thing, where you have a woman who said, you know, I need I'm pregnant and I want my husband to come home from the army, so don't you dare, Lincoln, do this. Or someone who's, again, an abolitionist saying you're not doing enough. All of them yelling back and forth, and it's just really effective in showing just how difficult things were for him and just the nature of what the country was like at the time, and makes a lot of interesting points about the way things are now. Last thing I want to mention before I stop here is the Gettysburg Address, which is not always on display there. There's a section called basically like the treasures area, where it has a lot of cool pieces and artifacts from the time period. But while I was there, they were showing it till the end of the week, the Gettysburg Address, one copy, which was a copy that Lincoln had written up and passed along, you know, one of, I think, 5, they said, copies that was available. And so that was very cool to see. You can come up and you can see the handwriting, which is a little hard to read, but, you know, it's all preserved, and obviously you can't touch it or anything. But having the chance to see that, again, something that really comes from history, is very cool. And I'm glad I got to see that and all the pieces in there. There's various elements from the time period, not just from Lincoln. There's something from General Grant, Lincoln's granddaughters, a lot of interesting things there. So just another section that's very cool to see. I should also mention the main rotunda is very big, and they have these figures that you can pose with as a family. If you go on Instagram, there's probably thousands of pictures of people posing with that family, of those characters of Lincoln and his family figures. There's another area which is like rotating short films too, that is worth checking out. I was only in there for a few minutes. Nice gift shop. And nearby, there's also a Lincoln Library. I did not go in there, but I suspect if you're someone who wants to go into research, that you can find tons of information there. So that is my, like I said, really quick thoughts, only about 20 minutes, but I'll fill in a bit more at the end on the podcast. So now I'm going to stop and throw it back to Dan in the future. Dan, please give us more great information. Take it away, Dan in the future. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed this trip way back to the ancient times of November 2021. As things continue to change, it does seem like a little while ago. I'm going to try and dig in a little more and give you more information about some of the offerings at the museum and my feelings about them. Before doing so, I wanted to mention a quick quote. This is from BRC Imagination Arts, has kind of a highlight reel of Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum on their Vimeo page. In the description, they have this quote, which was basically the challenge presented to BRC by the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency in the state of Illinois when they were creating the museum. Here's the challenge they were given. Abraham Lincoln is America's greatest president. His museum must be just as great. It must capture the essence of this magnificent, paradoxical, courageous, wise, puzzling, and fascinating, uncommon common man. It must inspire guests with the idea that they share essential qualities with Lincoln and that they, like Lincoln, are capable of greatness. Interesting. I kind of want to think of that as I'm talking through the various elements and the museum because I feel like that does sum up what they are going for, and I think they really do hit it for the most part. So I'm going to start with Lincoln's eyes, which I know I mentioned already several times, including the description recently in the clip. And I have to admit that I, while looking at it, described it like it was an actual artist that had painted the Lincoln painting that was talking to us. That is incorrect. It's actually an actor, Richard Doyle, playing the artist. And Richard has an interesting history. He's been on a lot of TV shows, a lot of movies, and he also appeared working with BRC in a 3D movie called Wizard of Change, which was done for the California Science Center in conjunction with the 1984 Summer Olympics. And he played a wizard character there. So I think he has the history of that, also understands how to work within kind of like a, I wouldn't even call it holographic, but it's like digital projection where it looks like he is just a guy standing on stage, but he's actually obviously a filmed character. So that's a big part of it there too. And also I wanted to mention that this film was directed by Charles Ott. Charles did a lot more, though, than just direct the film. He is a theater and multimedia director, and at the time was also the co-creative director for the museum and the library for BRC. He won a themed entertainment award in 2006 for his work on this museum. So Charles did a lot more than just this film. He was involved in every aspect, at least from what I could tell, of this museum. And the film's use of just these layered digital projection screens is very well done. I would love to go back and watch more of it because, I did post a short clip on my YouTube channel for the Tomorrow Society podcast just to give you an idea of what the film was like, especially Richard Doyle playing the artist. But that only gives you a small taste of it and doesn't show the full setup with, basically 3 screens next to each other and then having other images behind them and everything, which is so well done. And I think the most important thing kind of goes back to what they were saying is that this film does a good job, less about the descriptions of the eyes, which I think is a nice way to kind of frame the story. It's more about some of its descriptions for me of Lincoln being a real guy and struggling, and the nation struggling, and everything going on around the Civil War, and people having a lot of different thoughts about it. And that covers the entire museum. And especially for me is what I really take away more than anything beyond the technology, which is awesome, and kind of just being wowed by feeling like you're within a battle or just the different techniques they use to kind of expand the story beyond just watching a movie. It's that idea that things were tough for Lincoln. He was not perfect. He had to make a lot of compromises. We also see that in the Steven Spielberg film Lincoln. The best parts of that to me or where Lincoln is having a hard time. He isn't sure what to do. There are different points of view. By the end, it kind of falls a little bit into kind of rah, yeah, we won kind of experience with the passing of the amendment. But there are parts of that film that really connect me, and especially Daniel Day-Lewis's performance, to what happens at this museum. I also want to talk briefly again about Ghosts of the Library, which is probably the most technically impressive attraction at the entire museum. And it uses the holovision technology, which if you've seen Mystery Lodge at Knott's Berry Farm being the most well-known example, though it's not currently operating, and there are some rumors that it might get replaced or removed for a big new coaster that may be coming in. But it's been around for a long time. Originally, Spirit Lodge, the Vancouver World's Fair, is where it started, and then also Animation Celebration at Universal Studios Japan. But this is, as you know by those examples, impressive theme park technology being used here. Mystery Lodge is an awesome show. So the fact that that's also being used at a museum for Abraham Lincoln, I think is super cool. Now, this relates though to, as I've looked into it more, not everyone is such a fan of this museum. Now, granted, anything like this, where there's a big change and really a different approach taken to presenting history, is going to get some issues. And then, of course, you have Bob Rogers' connection to Walt Disney Imagineering, where people are looking at it. And it reminds me a little bit of the Disney's America discussions, which, kind of looking back at what those are. We recently watched a Defunctland episode on YouTube about that, and just how much irritation there was from historians about what was possibly going to happen there. And I'm looking at an old article from the Washington Post from 2005, where you have a historian, John Y. Simon, who taught history at SIU Carbondale at the time, and he had edited the papers of Ulysses S. Grant, very well-known historian in that circle, had basically called it Six Flags Over Lincoln, is a phrase he uses in this article, and Las Vegas East, the modern equivalent of the old wax museum. So, it's interesting because you could really dig in and attack it. And then I saw an article from 2015, it was the Illinois Times, but talking about the library portion and how much it was short-staffed and struggling. And I don't know, again, I don't want to take a few random articles and overthink them. There are more examples of, I went and had a really good experience personally visiting the museum, experiencing these attractions, but maybe it's not for everyone. I mean, there is a section, the 1860 election, where you walk into an area and you have Tim Russert basically there. They created it like a CNN approach to the 1860 election with a bunch of different candidates. They created commercials. It's really clever, and it's so different even than the rest of the museum. And so you could easily look at that as someone who believes history should be taken seriously and has dedicated their life to it and say, it's insulting. I didn't experience it that way. To me, I looked at it as they're trying something different and interesting to show the various issues that were on display, including slavery, that were such a big part of that election, which of course was before the Civil War, but a lot of those issues would then move on and impact the Union for the entire war and throughout Lincoln's entire presidency. The article in the Washington Post also has Rogers talking about how they have many Lincolns and other characters throughout the museum, and they're sculpted with foam, coated with fiberglass, and they don't move. And he mentions kind of, too, that they were trying not to just have it feel too much like Disney attractions with animatronics that kind of move around a little bit and make it something different. And I think they did, though it's hard to really completely pull away from the connections there. But they have some really nice setups. There's one that is not directly presenting Lincoln that shows a family basically being separated through the slave trade in one of the exhibits. And it's super effective and really sad. And it does a good job visually with showing you kind of the impact that slavery had on people's families. And it wasn't just some idea that had, it's easy to kind of just look back at history. This is similar to terrible historical times or practices that if you get to see something visually, it's going to have a greater effect on you. And I think that's definitely the case here, where being able to see something like this, you're able to experience it more. And that's the case with going through the cabin and you seeing Lincoln reading there. And that's a very famous setup. But there's also something kind of funny where you have someone laying under the covers and they're snoring, basically. Just a nice little touch. And somebody could say, oh, well, is that really needed? But again, it brings a little life to it, makes it a little less painful. The slave auction scene is just horrifying and just really hard to take, but also very effective. And then they have kind of the standard Lincoln scenes where you have his business venture at a store in New Salem, where you have Lincoln standing there and working, living in Springfield. You have him there with Mary Todd, kids playing in one room, just a lot of great stuff. And these are all really big scenes, big rooms, give you plenty of chances to move around, especially important due to a time of COVID, where even though there were a decent amount of people there, wearing masks. Masks are required, I should mention, for everyone, regardless of vaccination status. But going there in November and being able to kind of move around comfortably, the original area you walk in, where they have the Lincoln figures that you could stand and take a picture with. I did not, and the big White House behind them and everything else is very large. It almost feels like you're outside. So getting the chance to kind of experience that, and then you go through. There's just some really effective areas. There's a hallway. They call it the Whispering Gallery, and they describe it as you could hear voices of just these horrible rumors and terrible things being said, and then all these caricatures and political cartoons at the time that are just super mean and attack Lincoln from all sides. And you have other scenes where you walk in and Lincoln's son Willie has died, and he's basically at a party, and he leaves and goes and sees him there. Another one, which actually reminds me a lot of the Spielberg film, is the War Office, where Lincoln is standing at the table. He just read the first draft of the Emancipation Proclamation, and you have everyone kind of having different reactions. And then as you go by, there's like a sign that talks about each person and what they thought about it. And that's really effective. You have people like Seward and Chase and Stanton and others, and what they thought about each one. Seward and Chase and Dunn. And I've mentioned it before, but the hallway, as you go past these images of everyone yelling, showing the controversy, and then Lincoln standing in the back next to the Emancipation Proclamation, is really well done. There's also sections on Ford's Theater, then of course Lincoln lying in state. Just a lot to see, and it's very, very cool. Overall, obviously you're coming to this show, you want to hear about theme park attractions. That's totally true. And I can't wait to get back to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, Universal, all those parks, and I hope I do so. But I do enjoy kind of the approach of, instead, for this particular trip, it was a quick day, not even 90-minute drive both ways. I should also mention, at least when I was there, that there's a parking garage that it did not cost anything. They may be charging on busier times because it was very empty, right nearby, so you can essentially park right there, walk over. Tickets for me was $15, and there was also like a deal on the site, so I think it ended up being $13. And I just mentioned that more because you get a lot for that. And that includes all the exhibits, all the attractions, exhibitions, everything. And then there's a lot of areas you can also walk around downtown Springfield and experience a lot more. They'll hand you a map at the desk where you can kind of go outside and experience a lot more. Also, the state capitol is right there, though it was under construction when I walked by. And I was only there for a short time, so I didn't even get to experience a lot of that. So I think you can make it a really strong day trip. I mean, depending on if you're in Chicago or in St. Louis or around. I mean, I don't know. Again, your interest in Lincoln and in this type of museum will dictate how far you would want to travel for it. But I think if you are interested and this is a place that you would like to travel to, I think that it's going to be worth your while. It's very easy to get in and out of Springfield. It's not complicated. I didn't even go in the library, but if you're someone who's more of a researcher, historian type person, that may be something that also interests you. I mean, it's massive and it's right next door. Basically, each part takes up like a city block. So I haven't really mentioned that on this show, but that may be something you might be interested in too, is checking out the library. And of course, pretty soon after this one, at some point, they may have another special exhibit that may also be very interesting. So I've kind of just covered the basics here, but there's plenty more in the museum and around in Springfield that is definitely worth checking out. I hope that you found this interesting. After I finish this podcast, I am going to play the full audio for Ghosts of the Library as a little bonus. Only warning I will give you is that it will spoil it a bit, especially the end. There is a surprise that might be spoiled. But if you don't mind, having a slight surprise ending be given, it may be worth listening to. At least it gives you a better idea of the show. It's about 8 minutes long, so I'm going to run that at the end. I recorded video, but it's not pretty. It's not something I would put the full thing. I did put a clip on the YouTube channel if you want to go check that out. That at least then, after hearing the audio, you can kind of get, it's like 40 seconds or so. Just get a quick glance of what the actor is doing there on stage. It shows them, the clip I put up shows him interacting with a ghost using the holovision technology. So I'll have links for both that and the clip for Lincoln's Eyes in the show notes that you can check out and enjoy, get a good gauge of what it's going to be like, and also a few photos from inside the museum. I've included another group of photos along with the podcast post to kind of give you a better idea of what the trip was like from the exhibits and from other parts of the museum. So that's going to do it for this Trip Report episode of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield, Illinois. Don't forget to rate the Tomorrow Society podcast on Spotify. If you'd like to listen through that service, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/Spotify to do that. If you'd like to help support the show and get access to some cool perks, go to patreon.com/tomorrowsociety. Make a small monthly contribution and really help out the show. You can also follow the show on Twitter at TomorrowSOC. You can send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, or follow me on Facebook or Instagram. Music for this show is written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I'll be talking with Imagineer Tim Landry about working on visual effects for Cinemagique, Mystic Manor, Soarin' Fantastic Flight, so much more. Tim has a really cool story. I can't wait for you to hear this show. Be safe out there. I hope you're all doing amazing and are hanging in there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I will talk to you again next time.
Hi, you're already here. I guess I didn't see you come in. Is this on? Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. I'm glad you could visit us today. My name is Thomas, and I am here to tell you a little bit about what we do here and why this is such a special place to visit. A presidential library isn't like an ordinary library where you check out a book to read. It's a place where we historians do our most important research work. This is an archive where we preserve and study a collection of original letters, personal objects, photos, and papers about a president and his times. These things help us understand how people thought back then. Like this. This is Mary Lincoln's music box. Some of the actual music the Lincolns heard played the same way as they heard it. But so what? Why study all this old stuff? Who cares? Some people wonder if history isn't just a lot of dull, useless stuff you have to memorize for school. It might be different if these objects and papers could speak. What secrets would they reveal? But then sometimes they do speak. Sometimes late at night, when the library gets dark and quiet and you're alone. Sometimes, if you listen deeply, the history comes to life. One of our jobs is to collect rare manuscripts. Ever wondered what a Civil War battle was really like? Here's a journal of a young soldier who was there. I heard the screaming and bursting of shells, canister, and shrapnel. The death screams of wounded animals. The groans of their human companions, wounded and dying. A perfect hell on earth. By studying these memories, we create our own experience of those times, as if we had been there with them long ago. Sometimes, in our imaginations, these people seem so real. If only we could meet them for a moment, ask them a question. But we can't. They're gone. And everyone knows there's no such thing as a ghost. But here is something that is real. The people may be gone, but they have left their words and their possessions. In a mysterious way, these original objects connect us to the people and events of history and make them real. The Gettysburg Address, in Lincoln's own hand. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom,
and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
The power of those words almost makes you feel like he's right here with us. This might surprise you, but this collection is still growing. We get new items all the time. These came in today. I often dream of discovering in a farmhouse attic, in a garage sale, or perhaps right here in the collection, a long-lost box that has not been opened in 100 years. Imagine what could be inside of it. A secret diary, clues that unlock the mystery, perhaps a letter. A long-lost letter that no one has read in over 100 years. What could it say? Perhaps it would be one of the missing Mary letters. You see, after Lincoln's death, their oldest son Robert had his mother declared insane. Then he tried to collect all the letters she wrote and suppress them. Why? What was in them? But Robert burned all those letters, or as many as he could find. So perhaps we'll never know. Or perhaps we'll find the answer in the next box or envelope we open. This library is filled with items that, well, they're almost like buried treasure. Take this deed, for example. It's just a deed for a very small plot of land, no big deal. Until you read the fine print and see that it's a burial plot for the Lincoln's second child, Eddie, who died in the Lincoln's home just a few blocks from where you were sitting right now. This deed helps us picture two broken-hearted parents who were saying goodbye to their beloved little boy. To lose a child is an almost unbearable burden for even the strongest parents. Mary lost 3 of her 4 children: Eddie, Willie, Tad. And of course, Mary saw her husband die too. Grief. Yes, that's here. So are joy, anger, heartbreak, love, sacrifice, and triumph. Let me show you what I mean. You see that flag? It's my favorite item from this collection. The flag from the 33rd Illinois. That flag was with us on June 22nd, 1863, when we were down in Mississippi at a town called Vicksburg. General Grant ordered an assault that morning. I was a proud member of the 33rd, and I carried that flag into battle. I didn't come back, but we still have the flag. So, why save all this stuff? Because our past illuminates our future. It tells us we are a people who despise oppression and embrace freedom, and that we are willing to fight and, if need be, die for those ideals. I know. I died for those ideals that day in Vicksburg. That was my flag. Now, it's yours. As long as our story is told,